can pretend to be strong. You can fake confidence for a while. You can dress yourself in discipline and ambition. But weakness has a way of revealing itself in patterns too subtle to ignore. Niccolò Machiavelli lived in a world of liars, opportunists, and power seekers. He could not afford to guess who was strong and who was pretending. He had to know. And he learned quickly that weakness rarely shouts. It slips quietly through the cracks. Strong men stay calm in silence. Weak men expose themselves through behaviors they barely notice. And once you see these cracks in others or in yourself, you hold a weapon most people overlook. The weapon of discernment. Machiavelli identified 3 patterns that betray weakness more clearly than words ever could. The first is overjustification. The second is weaponized niceness. The third is display addiction. Each reveals a man who cannot stand on his own foundation. Let us begin with the first. Overjustification. Weak men explain. Strong men decide. A man who constantly defends his choices, over-explains his actions, or repeats his opinions is not showing clarity. He is showing insecurity. Machiavelli saw this in court every day. Princes secure in their power spoke little. Merchants and ministers pretending to be important filled the air with explanations. They needed others to agree before they could believe in themselves. It was not confidence. It was dependence, and dependence is weakness. Carl Jung wrote, people will do anything no matter how absurd to avoid facing their own souls. Overjustification is exactly that, avoidance. It is a smokescreen for fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being insignificant. The man who must secure permission before he moves will never be trusted with real power, because power requires conviction. Power requires silence. Power requires the ability to act without begging for approval. So the next time you hear someone endlessly explaining, repeating their point to sound reasonable, nice, or correct, understand what you are hearing. Not strength but collapse in slow motion. And this is only the first mask of weakness. The next is colder and even more deceptive. Some forms of weakness are obvious. Others are hidden behind a smile. Machiavelli understood that the most spineless men did not always appear afraid. They often looked friendly, helpful, agreeable. But beneath the surface it was not kindness. It was submission disguised as virtue. A strong man can be kind, but his kindness is deliberate. It has boundaries and it never costs him his self-respect. A weak man uses kindness as a shield. He agrees to avoid conflict. He compliments to be liked. He apologizes not because he is wrong but because he is scared. This is why excessive niceness is not a virtue. It is a strategy to survive. And like all false strategies, it collapses under pressure. When constant friendliness fails to earn validation, the mask begins to slip. Niceness turns bitter. Agreement turns into sarcasm. Smiles turn into resentment. Because the kindness was never real. It was fear seeking safety. Machiavelli watched this in public life constantly. He wrote, a prince must know how to do wrong and not use it unless compelled. True restraint is a choice, not a fear. But weaponized niceness is always fear. It is the posture of a man who cannot stand tall on his own. Carl Jung warned, the shadow is not defeated by force but transformed through attention. Weak men refuse to confront their shadow. Instead, they cover it with a smile. They hope to disappear into the background, believing that avoiding conflict will preserve them. But avoidance only magnifies their fragility. This is why the compulsively nice man cannot be trusted with power. Because the first moment his safety is threatened, his loyalty will break. Niceness offered to everyone is loyalty to no one. It is a desperate attempt to belong. And desperation makes a man unstable. The strong man sets boundaries without apology. He can say no without collapsing into guilt. He can face tension without flinching into a false grin. His kindness is real because it comes from strength, not from fear. And fear is what defines the weak. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "I am not upset that you lied to me, I am upset that from now on I cannot believe you." This is the truth of the overly nice man. When his smile hides fear, you cannot trust his smile. When his apology hides panic, you cannot trust his apology. When his kindness is only a mask, you cannot trust the man. Machiavelli studied these cracks like a predator studies movement, because he knew when a man's friendliness is compulsive, it is not generosity but insecurity. And insecurity is the soil where betrayal grows fastest. So when you see someone who bends too easily, who never disagrees, who hides anger behind constant politeness, you are not looking at a strong ally. You are looking at a man who will collapse the moment pressure arrives. That is not kindness. That is weakness in disguise. And there is a third behavior even more humiliating and exposed: the craving not for peace but for recognition. Some men can survive without being seen. Others treat invisibility as death. Machiavelli observed this pattern everywhere in courts and councils and markets. He saw men who could not breathe without recognition. Men who turned every gesture into a performance, every success into a stage act. This is display addiction. It looks like confidence, but it is not. It is desperation. It is the panic of a man who believes he only matters when eyes are on him. He fears silence because silence feels like erasure. He fears stillness because stillness feels like irrelevance. The display addict talks louder than necessary. He exaggerates small victories. He posts constantly. He seeks applause. He decorates his image like a mask. But beneath the show there is no foundation. Only the emptiness of someone who cannot stand without attention. Carl Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." The man addicted to display has never accepted himself. He survives on reflection, not on reality. He needs to see himself in the eyes of others because he cannot meet his own gaze in silence. This is why display addiction is weakness, not strength. A strong man can be unseen and remain whole. He can build in silence, train in solitude, plan without witnesses. His value does not depend on applause. But the weak man collapses without an audience. He becomes a puppet waiting to be controlled by whoever offers the loudest approval. Machiavelli knew exactly how fragile this man was. He saw that if you want to ruin him, you do not need to fight him. You simply withdraw attention. Ignore him, deny him the stage, cut off the applause. And watch how quickly he begins to fracture. Because his identity was never internal, it was rented from others. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, "The crowd is untruth." The display addict lives entirely for the crowd. He cannot separate his worth from their gaze. And this dependency makes him volatile. He will betray allies, expose secrets, burn bridges. All to keep the spotlight shining on him. Because for him obscurity is worse than death. Machiavelli feared this kind of man more than he feared villains. A villain at least knows what he wants. A display addict wants everything. But he will trade anything to be seen. He is unstable because he is empty. And emptiness can be filled with anything, including destruction. This is why the combination of overjustification, weaponized niceness, and display addiction forms the most dangerous type of weakness. Such a man is not a villain, he is a void. He will bend, twist, and reshape himself to fit the expectations of whoever offers him validation. He is not an ally, he is a liability. And the wise know to keep him at a distance. But Machiavelli did more than observe. He learned to use weakness as a tool. And that is where the lesson deepens. Machiavelli did not only identify weakness, he weaponized it. He saw that understanding a man's cracks was more useful than fearing them, because the weak man does not break when tested. He melts. In politics and business and trust, you cannot depend on someone who melts. So Machiavelli developed a strategy. He studied patterns and used them like levers. Not to shout, not to dominate, but to guide men into obedience without them realizing it. Consider the compulsive justifier, the man who cannot stop explaining. Instead of arguing, Machiavelli would listen. He would nod, he would agree, he would say that makes perfect sense. And suddenly that man felt validated. He clung to Machiavelli, desperate for more of the rare approval. Soon he would defend him, support him, even spy for him. Not out of loyalty but out of need. Then there was the agreeable pleaser, the man who avoided conflict at all costs. To him Machiavelli gave a role, a job, a title, something that made him feel chosen and safe. That man would never betray him because betrayal meant losing the fragile identity holding him together. And finally the display addict, the man who needed the stage like air. Machiavelli gave him the illusion of spotlight. He allowed him to speak in public, to take credit for ideas that served Machiavelli's goals. He let him wear the costume of influence. But behind the curtain Machiavelli was the one writing the script. This is the art of subtle power. You do not need to threaten. You do not need to command. You simply give each man the one thing he is desperate for. Validation for the justifier, belonging for the pleaser, attention for the performer. And they bind themselves to you. Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Machiavelli lived by this principle in reverse. He exposed the unconscious fears of others and used them to direct their choices. He understood that the weak man does not want freedom. He wants comfort disguised as freedom. He wants to be led but not to feel controlled. So Machiavelli let him believe the decision was his. The best manipulation never looks like manipulation. It looks like friendship. It looks like mentorship. It looks like presence. Philosopher Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The weak man is never his own master. He is mastered by fear, by the craving for applause, by the hunger for approval. Machiavelli exploited this truth. He did not need to raise his voice. He needed only to understand. So he spoke less than expected. He let weak men overexpose themselves. He practiced silence until silence became presence and presence became power. His words were rare and thus precious. A nod, a compliment, a glance could tie a man to him for years. While others reacted to weakness with disgust, Machiavelli reacted with calculation. He turned weakness into architecture. He let weak men build his power with their own desperation, and when they grew restless he did not punish them. He simply withdrew the approval they depended on. They collapsed on their own. This is how empires are built, not only with armies but with psychology, by turning the fragile into tools, by letting the insecure carry bricks for the palace they will never rule. But Machiavelli's sharpest insight was this: you cannot only hunt weakness in others, you must hunt it within yourself. Machiavelli feared weak men, but he feared something even more: the possibility of weakness within himself. Because the world spots cracks before you do, and once exposed those cracks can be used against you. So he developed a system of self-examination, a daily war against the subtle instincts that betray fragility. He hunted his own habits before they betrayed him in public. First he studied his tendency to explain. When you are strong you decide. When you are weak you explain. Whenever he caught himself talking too much or repeating his point to be accepted, he stopped. He reminded himself that a man who begs for validation forfeits authority. Second, he tested the weight of his agreements. People think saying yes is harmless, but Machiavelli saw that a weak yes can ruin kingdoms. Agreeing to avoid conflict, agreeing to gain favor, agreeing without conviction. He asked himself, would I say yes if I did not fear losing approval? If the answer was no, he declined. No excuse, no apology. Because a word without weight is not power. Third, he measured his silence. Weak men fear silence and rush to fill it. They joke, they flatter, they explain because silence reveals their insecurity. Machiavelli made silence his weapon. He practiced sitting inside it until silence became presence and presence became strength. Fourth, he resisted unnecessary exposure. The weak man always craves to be seen. The strong man chooses when. Machiavelli trained himself to stay invisible until the right moment. He let others chase the spotlight while he worked in the shadows. And when he finally moved, it was not gradual progress, it was sudden arrival. Not noise but impact. This was not about looking powerful. It was about removing every behavior that revealed weakness before others could exploit it. He stripped out habits one by one until only conviction remained. Carl Jung warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Machiavelli took this as a command. To accept oneself is not to embrace weakness but to confront it without illusion, to kill the need for constant approval, to end the hunger for applause, to silence the fear of standing alone. When you do this, something changes. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer collapse under judgment. You no longer chase comfort in the crowd. You become unsettling because you reveal nothing. And what people cannot read, they begin to respect. Nietzsche observed that what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. Weakness collapses into endings. Strength becomes a bridge. When you remove fragile patterns from yourself, you do not just gain control. You become the standard others measure against. The quiet reminder of what discipline looks like when it is embodied, not performed. This is the final Machiavellian lesson. Make your respect expensive. Do not flatter for free. Do not give your approval easily. Make your silence deliberate and your words rare. Because what is rare becomes valuable. And valuable things cannot be ignored. So let others reveal themselves through noise. Let them justify, let them perform, let them chase the spotlight. You remain in silence, building with precision, until the day your presence alone commands attention without effort. Power is not shouted, it is engineered. Respect is not demanded, it is cultivated. Strength is not performed, it is proven in the absence of weakness. And once you have mastered the shadows within yourself, you no longer chase respect. You become the source of it. The room shifts when you enter. People measure their words around you. Not because you forced them, but because you mastered what they could not. This is the end of the Machiavellian path. Not domination through cruelty. Not fear through violence. But authority through calibration. The undeniable presence of a man who has killed his weakness and sharpened his silence. A man who does not demand respect because he has left no choice but to give it.